Ashe family, welcome back to another episode of My Unapologetic Perspective. This is the podcast we give our point of view on controversial topics from my experience, Black history, and our knowledge as African Americans. Black history presently lives in us so we can continue to excel into the future. It's one thing to know Black history. It's another thing to take advantage of what the people in Black history did for you. I am your host, Martre Baker Stevens, and to the right of me is my brother, Shaquan Battle.
We back.
And to the right of him is our father, Jerome Battle.
What's up?
I appreciate all the love and support we've been getting. There's been people who've been going up to my wife saying, hey, I love your husband and their dads, their podcast, and people have been just showing us a lot of love. And a lot of people they don't talk publicly about the things that we speak about on this podcast because of where we come from. The area in which we live in, there are people who are hesitant to talk about the things publicly that we talk about because this is kind of a place where things is just pushed underneath a rug and swept over top, and it's just kind of been normalized for us to not say anything publicly, but privately a lot of people agree with what we do. Where would you gentlemen like to start?
I say, let's start. Your when you went to the middle school, let's start there.
Okay, yeah, I went to the middle school for Black History Month to speak to sixth graders. Again, every year I do a couple of schools, and this year it was I want to do something really different. Normally, I take, different ways of doing things, whether I'm speaking to a high school or to a middle school. But this year, I kind of wanted to do something different, so I actually did a presentation. I actually did a PowerPoint this time. And what I did was I wanted to correlate history to today. So, for instance, I took, Moses Fleetwood, and then took Moses Fleetwood into a Jackie Robinson, and then the Jackie Robinson into a Ken Griffey Jr. So now you got three aspects of history that's important to Black people, but you connect them together because without Moses Fleetwood, you never get a Jackie. Without Jackie, you never get a Ken Griffey, and you don't get the players that you get today. Also doing that from other stances, when you look at a Frederick Douglass. Without a Frederick Douglass, you never get a Dr. King, and without a Dr. King, you never get a Barack Obama. Politics to the side. Those men done things that push the envelope forward to get us to where we are today. So we're just going throughout history, doing those things, and sixth grade is one of the hardest ones to do, and I think the reception was done very well because it correlated a lot of things to it. Like one of the ones that they loved was taking Billie Holiday, Strange Fruit, a record that kind of transcended of putting free speech out there through music. Mm-hmm. And then you going from Billie Holiday to Marvin Gaye, What's Going On. Then from Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, you never get a Tupac Shakur. And when Tupac come up, they're like, oh my God. And then you talk about Kendrick Lamar at the Super Bowl, and it's like, oh my God. And then you connect all of those dots, and that's what's important to Black history.
So basically you hit every generation that was in there, from the teachers to the kids to...
Absolutely. And it's just showing the path of Black history, because when we think of black history, we think of just certain names and certain dates, and you want to just picture that, and that's important. But Black history is important because of the path that's laid down. Mm-hmm. There's certain things and certain aspects of things people did that people don't know about that make it effective to what we did today. So for instance, you take a picture of Irene, who decided not to get off a bus, right? Irene Morgan in 1944.
Before.
Yeah, and then you go from Irene Morgan to Claudette Colvin and Rosa Parks, and then you go from that to how y'all get to school this morning. It's because of these people, that allowed us to be in the classroom that we are in today. So it was just that type of correlation.
And without that, if you weren't able to set the stage where they could take a piece of history and attach it to something that they're familiar with, do you think that you would have got the attention that you got from the people that were the kids that were listening? And is there a difference in between getting the attention of white students versus minority students?
Yes. So again, when you look at the history and you look at who you're talking to, you're talking about sixth grade. So you have to put it in near lap to make them understand. Now, the political people, they probably didn't get. You know what I'm saying? They don't understand the importance of even Kamala Harris, right? You don't understand the importance of her because of what's going on in the outside world, but she's one of the first women in general to be in the position that she was in. But you kind of hit those bullet points because you want to plant that seed. And then, of course, the names that's going to stand out to them is when you begin to talk about people like a Ken Griffey Jr. Because there was one white girl who had her hat backwards in the class. And I'm like, Ken Griffey Jr. started this trend in the 90s where he wore his hat backwards. And I pointed to her and she looked like, what? And I'm like, you got your hat backwards. You could thank Ken Griffey Jr. for that. It was a kid who was in class who had a Ken Griffey shirt on. He didn't even know the significance of Ken Griffey. Most of the time, these kids just wear shirts and it looks good to match their clothes. You don't even know the significance of that. And I believe that, you know, that's important to when we begin to talk about our history. And normally black students are one of the, it does blow my mind that when I speak to schools, some of the kids that are kind of being disrespectful that you kind of have to get on sometimes are the black students. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about black history, those should be the kids that be paying attention the most. White kids shouldn't shush you because they're trying to pay attention to black history to another black child. Right. And that happens every year at every school. Right. You know what I'm saying? And that's probably what bothers me the most. But when you talk about sixth grade, you have to kind of put it into their lap of where they are to grasp their attention, and then you can get into more the history. And then also talked about, you know, just local history, and a lot of them enjoyed that as well. So it was definitely a great time.
And if I'm not mistaken, this was a white teacher that reached out to you?
Yes, it's the same. Shout out to Emily Stevens, no relation, but that's like family. But yeah, she does this every year. Even when she was at the elementary school, she would say, "Hey, I got to get you in here for Black History Month. This is important. That's we got to make it happen." And then this year, she was like, "Hey, what can we do to make this better? Like, how can we grow this?" And I'm like, honestly, I would go get people in the community that are important to Black history. There are people who are still alive today. You should bring them in here and let them talk. Like, I'll be here, but also give them other faces and other voices to look at as well.
I like that because it shows that she just don't want it to stop there. She wants to, how can we grow this?
Yeah.
How can we expand it? I like that.
Yeah. Madam C.J. Walker, they love that. Once you talk about how much money she was grossing the black girls, looking like how much she made, how much on her hair care products, like it's that. And then my favorite part was our cousin Lil Quentin was in the class, and I wore his hoodie that day. And you go from talking about Madam C.J. Walker, who became a millionaire, and then you put that into just owning her own business, and then you put up a picture of Status Barbershop, right, of Cheney Preston owning a business, and then you talk about somebody that's in your class sitting down with you, and I got on this hoodie. Maybe one day he'll be a millionaire based off something he's doing at this age. That, you know, age doesn't matter. So. Definitely a great time to have.
You made it tangible for every single kid in there.
You tried to. You have to.
Good.
Where would you guys like to go?
Let's talk about sports for a second.
Okay.
So South Carolina, girls basketball, doing it again. Opportunity to win another national championship under Don Staley. Quick racist history on South Carolina University. Back in the 1800s, that was a predominantly black school, almost one of the first HBCUs. And then in late 1870, they closed, and when they reopened 8 years later, it was a segregated school. Blacks could no longer attend, and it stayed that way for quite a while until they desegregated the school and allowed blacks to come back. That's important when you have a program that when Don Staley first took over, they had a racist statue on the premises. that she was adamant about needing to be removed. After she waited, she did the right thing. You wait till you win the national championship, you get the following, and then you start making demands.
Right.
And they honored that demand in 2018. So kudos to Dawn Staley for not only making a difference with the kids that she's mentoring and teaching, but sometimes people don't realize that's what you do as a basketball coach or just an athletic coach in general. You're also mentoring and teaching for these young ladies to become young women in society. So kudos to her for doing that, but also not forgetting that she has a responsibility to talk about injustice and discrimination, racism, things of that nature. So a lot of praise go to her for what she's doing. But then also on the men's side, you got Houston, who at one point in history, as we talked about in this podcast, formatted the first all-black starting lineup on an NCAA basketball court. So once again, you have black history showing itself in modern times. So when you hear people like in the Trump administration, just in the Republican Party in general, talk about woke or people being woke and not talking about these type of things, this is their way of trying to silence you about history, American history, not just black history, but history, period. They want to tell their story. And in their story, they can sit down with their daughters and sons and grandkids and tell them about their great-great-grandparents who owned slaves, but they don't want us to tell our kids that we were once enslaved. So it's okay for them to talk about it in the sense that they own slaves, because it's important for them to understand that that means that you are above some people. There's a reason that they have this dialect with those kids, and it's not to show that this was American history. Because if it was, then it would be okay to talk about who their great-great-great-grandparents actually owned as slaves,
Right.
which they don't do. So that I think that's important. And also, speaking of South Carolina, they also have one of the greatest tragedies, massacres in any school history. Not at South Carolina University, but at South Carolina State College, where 3 black students were killed by state police as they protested a bowling alley that was segregated, and they opened fire on the students. Probably one of the only times in history that law enforcement actually fired weapons at students on during a protest. So South Carolina has a lot of racist history. As you know, I'm not a fan of that state. And these are reasons why. Is the things that they do to black people, and then the message that they send to the public is that this is all good. None of those police officers were found guilty. Of course, they were acquitted of all charges. One black person was arrested and served prison time for instigating it as being a protester. The irony of all this is what I'm alluding to is that when Black Lives Matter began protests shortly after George Floyd was killed, a lot of white Americans would say that this was terroristic acts, that the Black Lives Matter should be on the domestic terrorist group list because of their violent protests, which was not the case. It was the anti-protesters of Black Lives Matter that was the instigators in every situation regarding protests with Black Lives Matter. But then this past weekend, we had protests called All Hands Off, which is a protest to what Donald Trump's administration is doing. Yeah, a lot of black people were saying that we shouldn't participate. I disagree. If you go back in history, once again, always connecting the dots to history to what's going on now, is when you think about the civil rights movement, you think about freedom riders, you think about Montgomery, you think about Selma. A lot of the first people killed were white people. So there have been white people that stood and died for causes that did not negatively impact them at all. They were doing what they thought was right. So in the case of hands off, this is a movement that is right, not about race. Just remember, racism is a form of prejudice. Prejudice is wrong regardless of the reason. And this hands off is a good movement. So people should not deter from being a part of a movement, as John Lewis used to say, a movement to get in good trouble. Good trouble is everybody's responsibility, not just black people, not just women, not just white people, but everybody's responsibility for good trouble.
Yeah, that can lead into my conversation. But before I do that, I also want to give shout outs to when you talk about women's basketball with Chania Abumake, Andrea Carter, and Ellie Duncan, the way that they've done this March Madness and covering women's basketball to take it to great heights. Even Chania Abumake, the way she holds it down on ESPN First Take.
That's right.
Because we see what's happening with men's basketball. And what I mean is a lot of NBA players are getting upset with the way that the analysts are covering their game and the way that they're trashing their game. Whether that's from Charles Barkley to Stephen A. Smith to Shaq to all of these former players who they have a great argument or hating on the new players and the way that they play the game. And seeing these former players, Chania Abumake, Andrea Carter, cover the game and lift up these women no matter what. And not just covering the women, but they understand the game. The things that they say during the game, it's like you have to respect women's basketball, not just from the performance standpoint, but from the coaches like Adon Staley, to the people who are covering the game, who know what there is they're talking about. Women's basketball is probably the most enjoyable game to watch right now, based on the things that they're doing. That's team oriented, the way it's covered and the way it's glorified. It's beautiful for basketball. But President Donald Trump issued an executive order.
Your president.
Empowering Vice President J.D. Vance to eliminate improper, divisive, or anti-American ideology from the 21 museums and learning centers operated by Smithsonian Institution. Again, we are talking about museums, a place where you don't have to go. There was a recent article a couple months ago locally where a mother complained about the books that were being presented at a public library. Fam, you don't have to go into a public library, or your kid don't have to pick up that book in a public library. So what we're doing is we want to pick and choose, right? They want to whitewash history to tell our children what they can learn about school by default. But they also want to whitewash it to say we can pick and choose on free speech to control anything that is learning availability around, whether it's books, whether it's museums, whether it's articles, or whether it's just our free speech online. Like there's certain words that they don't even want us to say, like white or racism. They don't even want us to say these words online. But Vance, who currently serves at the Smithsonian Institutional's board, will coordinate with the White House Budget Office to ensure future funding isn't spent on programs that degrade shared American values, divide Americans based on race, promote programs or ideologies inconsistent with federal law and policy. Divided based on race is the main plot of American history.
That's right.
Their definition of America is whitewash. Their definition of a true American is people who support the whitewash, including some Negroes. And anti-American is the people who challenge white supremacy in America. I heard someone say that the KKK is gone on one of the comment section. No, they're not. They just took their heads off. They just took the hoods off.
They ain't wearing hoods.
They was already people with power, control, and influence. I think one of the biggest myths is that the KKK were poor white people from the South who were mad that black people weren't advancing. No, these were judges. These were doctors. These was lawyers. These was congressmen. These was presidents.
School bus drivers.
Business owners. Like these people wore the hoods too. You know what I'm saying? And It ain't gone nowhere. They just took the hoods off and they put on their suits and they say, hey, here I am, right? Museums in our nation's capital should be places where individuals go to learn, not to be subjected to ideological indoctrination or divisive narratives that distort our shared history. Indoctrination is one of the main things that they keep saying. But when you're the narrator of American history, you can tell the story however you want.
That's right.
The thing is, you indoctrinate our children in these schools to tell the story the way that you want to tell it without the input of the victims. You don't want the victims to talk because now your child will be a victim by hearing the victims talk. Trump said Thursday, to advance this policy, we will restore the Smithsonian Institution to its rightful place as a symbol of inspiration and American greatness. It's the choice of words, right? The rightful place as a symbol of inspiration and American greatness. Meanwhile, they fired the African American that worked for Smithsonian that basically done that side of the thing. Meanwhile, it's people like Jackie Robinson, the Red Tails, or other black soldiers who are being removed from learning places. And then they eventually put it back after the uproar. But the thought that you would remove Jackie Robinson, the Red Tails, and other black soldiers and black people who helped create the foundations of this country and the way that we live today from learning opportunities just shows you the way that they value black people. Because African American greatness, their stories involve the American evil of white people. So if we mention African American stories, we have to cover the fact that this is going to make white people feel uncomfortable, what we're about to say. The fact that they were slaves, the fact that they were segregated, the fact that they were treated this way, the fact that they were not allowed in this place, the fact that they weren't allowed to go here, right? Trump addressed what he called a concerted and widespread effort over the past decade to rewrite American history while replacing objective facts with a distorted narrative driven by ideology rather than truth, and that it cast the founding principles of the United States in a negative light. Objective facts. The definition of objective facts is verifiable evidence and not influenced by a personal opinion or belief. When all the slave owners they teach about that they want to call so-called heroes, it's not an objective fact. You can say that George Washington was the first president, not that he was an American hero, but it's in your books that he's an American hero. That's not an objective fact.
That's right.
They believe that the slaves were called involuntary relocation.
That's right.
It's not an objective fact. You know, there's a video of a mother that went viral a few years ago who said, normally I don't, she spoke in front of the school board and said, normally I don't help my daughter with her homework. Her father does that because I'm doing work and I'm getting stuff prepared. But for this day, my husband had something to do, so I decided to help my daughter with her homework. And I came across something that was being taught that I have concerns about. And it said that in the textbook, it said that the Africans that were in America, their history is unknown, but we can guess that they were probably slaves or servants where they were from. And she said, it's one thing to not teach about African history or African American history. It's another thing to lie about it.
Right.
To put that into context, to try to tell a black child that the people that came over here didn't have a history, what they probably were better off here than they were there. You know what I'm saying? Right. And that just shows you the lies that they try to put on us. That is true indoctrination. In the latest order, the president has specifically targeted the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Like I said, the guy who coordinated that was fired. In the Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, Trump has called for the Interior Secretary to restore federal properties, including parks, memorials, and statues, which have been improperly removed or changed in the last 5 years to perpetrate a false revision of history. In most cases, the names or statues removed were of Confederate soldiers. So on the flip side, right, Let's take down Jackie Robinson. Let's take down the Red Tails. Let's take down the 369th Harlem Hellfighters. Let's take down Harriet Tubman. Let's remove all of these black names, but let's restore Robert E. Lee. Mm-hmm. Let's restore Stonewall Jackson.
Yep.
Like these are the type of things that we're talking about, because you don't want to talk about the 369th, the Harlem Hellfighters during World War I, because you would have to acknowledge the fact that they spent more time in combat than any other soldier. That goes against the narrative that all black people did during World War I was dig digits.
That's right.
No, they were in the trenches more than any other American unit. You don't want to talk about Juneteenth because it basically discontinues July 4th, that it was a day of freedom.
That's right.
Because our ancestors were still on the plantation. You can't teach about what Christopher Columbus saw when he first came to these parts, this new world, because they have evidence that the skeletons and the artifacts found here that blacks didn't come here as slaves at first.
That's right.
They were already here. You don't want to talk about the real reason why they shut public pools down, because you didn't want to integrate the public pools that were on the white side of town, and you did not want to give the pools, create public pools on the black side of town. So we'll shut it all down, go to the YMCA. Black people ain't gonna be able to afford the YMCA.
That's right.
You don't want to talk about the fair housing of 1968 that shows why blacks couldn't live in a certain area. Well, some people say, well, this is old history. That's 1968. A friend of mine was just in the news a couple weeks ago. Like a really good friend of mine, because he was living in an area and some of his neighbors showed him and his wife the text messages from their landlord that said, if you would have told me that the husband was black and the child was mixed, I would have never rented to them.
Wow.
Yep.
This is 2025 for the people who keep saying, well, that was 1968. This is something that we still have to deal with today, because it's not just public now. You're comfortable sending a message like that to neighbors. When blacks were lynched in the South, they made it an event. Bring the family, bring the kids, just like you was going to see a damn cinema. Mm-hmm. And you sat there and you ate food, you lit fireworks anytime they lynched a unguilty black person. Then they always want to bring up the Watts riots, the Ferguson riots, but they don't want to talk about, like you talked about with South Carolina, they don't want to talk about the massacres that happened just because black people were doing too good. Mm-hmm. And you know, I'm gonna just keep going real quick. My coworker said, you know, we'll tear this place up if Derek Chauvin was let free. I said, no, we won't. We won't do a thing. No. You know why? Because none of us would be shocked.
Right.
I was more surprised when Derek Chauvin was arrested. Mm-hmm. I was even more surprised when he was charged. I damn sure was surprised when he was convicted, and I was damn sure surprised when they gave him that sentence.
Yep.
But I still would not be surprised if they let him go, because it would not be abnormal to the history in America of how they feel about black people being killed.
That's right.
So if he was decided to be released today, it would be on par with the history in America. Mm-hmm. Rodney King's officers walked free. George Zimmerman walked free. Eric Garner officer was fired because they said that was an illegal chokehold. That Daniel Pantelio, whatever his name was, illegal chokehold. You're fired, you're out of here, but you ain't gonna face no charges for the illegal chokehold. And with the Rodney King situation and the Eric Garner situation, we'll pay you. We will pay the families before we ever send the people to prison.
That's right.
So cases like Emmett Till, yes, people were upset, but it was normal. Mm-hmm. When people went to that funeral, it was normal to go to these type of things. The problem that we have is that we have become numb to white supremacy in the way, like it's normal the way that we're treated and the way that we are just put to the back burner. It's normal. When George Floyd happened, the reason why there were so many protests and so much outrage is because we actually saw the footage. We saw the footage of this man with a knee on his neck for minutes, crying for his mama, and we all felt that shit. Because it had been something that we've been telling y'all that's been happening for centuries. Right? Now you get to see it. Same thing with the Rodney King situation. This is something that they've been saying in LA with police brutality. Now you actually see what it is, right? But a few months later, another situation happens. And another situation, another situation, another situation. Now, nobody's talking about George Floyd anymore. Not that it's not important.
Too many other ones.
It's too many other ones.
Too many other ones since then.
And we become numb to it. And that's the problem that we are having in this country, is that our pain is being mocked, right? There's always a counter. When it's Black Lives Matter, they say it's all lives matter. You know, when we say we need justice for, they come out and say we need justice for. But the difference is when we say we want justice for George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or Breonna Taylor, when we say we want justice for these individuals, it's because nobody was arrested, nobody's been prosecuted, nobody's being convicted, nobody's doing anything. On the flip side, when a white person dies, y'all post that y'all want justice for when that person got arrested 20 minutes after it happened and ain't getting no bond. Justice will happen, but the reason that we got to go through hoops and hurdles to get you to even act on certain situations shows the difference in what Donald Trump said, our divided race, that they claim that does not exist. That's all I got. But it just bothers me.
I just wonder why it's so hard for America to say, you know what, we fucked up. And we fucked up, but these people are the reason why, or black people still did great in America, even though we fucked up.
You're trending in the right direction. The problem is nobody's gonna stand up and say that they fucked up, because this is part of the plan. This is how this country was built. This is all part of the plan.
You're going off code. That's off the system.
Exactly. And so let's just go back for a second, because they tried other things in the beginning and it didn't work. So they tried to rid America of blacks by everything that they did during slavery. The number of blacks that died on the boat rides over, and the number of them that died once they got here due to disease, and then the ones that they actually murdered, right? So the whole idea was to try to get rid of us. Didn't work. Everything that they tried to get rid of blacks in America didn't work. So what they decided was, we got to keep them in their place. And that's what's been working. If you go back and you listen to Dr. Martin Luther King, when he talks about diversity and he talks about equal rights, he's also later on is mentioning all the things that we got was what you said we should get being American. Okay? That's what we're supposed to get. But now it's going to cost you something. 2 months later, he was dead. Right? This is one that I don't think a lot of people know. And if you can find it, it'd be great if you could post it. There's a video of John F. Kennedy in 1963 talking about the plan for America. And he included 2 words: diversity and peace. And in his commentary about peace was more about not having war, but in pursuit of peace for all people, including black people. I says that's what he got killed for. Diversity and peace. That's what he got killed for. Right? If you can find a video, that'll be awesome to play that so people can hear it. But let's just go back in time just for a quick sec. When we think about the Indians, right? Slaughtering them from day one. The day they hit the coast. Slaughter them from day one. Right? You go through the French and Indian War, right? They killing them, right? Not arresting them, no prisoners of war, killing them. even resulted to doing the same thing to the Indians that the Indians was doing to white people, scalping them, right? Took on their tactic and started scalping them. You get to 1832, and you have the Trail of Tears, to the point that, now this is something that's going to shock some people, but they gave them smallpox infected blankets. Now, anybody that know anything about people who come from another country versus the people that are here, when you're the only ones in the area and you bring new people in, you get exposed to disease because there is no immunity. So smallpox killed over 60,000 Indians during the Trail of Tears. So let's keep going. So this is one way to eradicate and get rid of Indians. They did a great job. They did a great job because you almost wiped out the Indian population in America. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about what they continue to do to black people to just try to get rid of us. A lot of people don't know about the syphilis incident started in 1932. So we're not talking about, not even 100 years ago, right? So in 1932, they took, I think it was about 600 men, and they had infected them with syphilis. And instead of unknowingly, and instead to the males, and was supposed to be treating them for it, but instead they watched them and documented the pathology of them dying over the course of 40 years to 1972.
Like an experiment.
That's what it was. It was an experiment. Let's talk about the so-called father of gynecology who operated on African women with no anesthesia. Mm-hmm. And what he did is he would have the slave owner basically sign over the rights to them, to him, to use them for whatever medical surgeries or experiments that he wanted. And for that, he wouldn't charge him, right? Because a lot of these may have been midwives. They were the ones that were raising these slave owners' kids, whatever. And he experimented on them with no anesthesia. And he took satisfaction in being able to do that, because he could have chose to give them anesthesia. They had it, but he didn't think that black people felt pain because they were able to withstand the whoopings that they were getting from slave owners. And he did that. Now, we're talking about a guy that they have a statue in Central Park right now in New York, and they title him the father of gynecology. Tried to take us out. Again, didn't work. Didn't work. So what are they doing right now? Mass deportations. So we got rid of the Indians. Mm-hmm. We couldn't do anything with these motherfucking black people though. But the Mexicans, we handle them. The Japanese, the Asians, Venezuelans, we can handle them. We can handle all of those. Just yesterday, they revoked the passport of anybody from South Sudanese.
Yep.
Now it's back to the black folks. We back to y'all now. We gotta do something with y'all. So it ain't enough that you look at the Doge committee, not a black person in sight. Donald Trump said he wanted the smartest and brightest of the bunch. So what does that mean when you look at Doge? That black people aren't smart and bright. That's sending you the clear message. So for me, this is what America was built on. It shouldn't surprise us. What surprises me is we stand for it. Mm-hmm. I've said this through the whole campaign before he was elected as president. Everybody, white people included, would say that Donald Trump is, when at the time was, the biggest threat to democracy. But nobody treated him like that. And we still don't. Mm-hmm. Now so when people say that Congress, they're not doing anything, they're just allowing it to happen, they're not allowing it to happen. But the minute that you say something, then you become the target. So if you say something that disagrees with Donald Trump or he doesn't like, you become a target. Immediately, you become a target. Right? So they have the right to free speech. And you do too if you say everything that corresponds with what they're saying. Anything outside of that, you're wrong. And you have to pay for that. So everybody's afraid. You got judges that are making decisions probably out of fear right now because they don't want to take on Donald Trump. This is all about white supremacy. That's what this country was founded on. And he's just doing it. A lot of people talked about it, but he like, shit, we got to go ahead to do it. I don't know what y'all doing, but we're going to do it. Who's going to stop us? Nobody. The only thing that's going to stop Donald Trump is that at some point, his term's going to run out. That's the only thing that's going to stop Donald Trump. And there's a lot of people that are saying that's the best bet. That's the best way to stop him. So you know what he decides? I'm going to change the Constitution so I can run again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. And people are championing it too. And if he happened to do it, he would win.
That's right. Absolutely.
The only problem with that means Obama can run again too. He may just beat him.
Yeah. Michelle ain't letting that happen. Yeah, Michelle ain't letting that happen, man.
I do got a question that's been lighting my timeline up this past week. Is it took one person to say my granddad said things was better before we integrated for black people. Do y'all agree or disagree?
It depends on what standpoint you look at from. From the things that we talk about and what we're championing on what we actually need in America, which is control our money, to build institutions and businesses, to control our neighborhoods, to control our schooling. Those are the things that we already had. You know what I'm saying? Those are things that we had before integration. When you talk about owning your own businesses, you're talking about people who were able to teach certain things in the school. Like Black History Month comes from Black History Week of Carter G. Woodson, in school teaching these things. You talk about institutions of our own hospitals. In fact, some of that is actually a myth, right? Because when we talk about Black-owned institutions, even during segregation, white people can still come. So a lot of the Black-owned or Black-ran hospitals were open to Black and white people. Black businesses was open to Black and white people. Black schools were open to Black and white people. It just wasn't the opposite. We couldn't go into their establishments,
Gotcha.
but they can come into ours. It was also a thing even with like clubs and casinos that Black people couldn't go across town to go party and dance with, white women at the other club, but they can come over to Harlem and dance with our women in our clubs and drink our drinks and gamble and all these things. So that part is a myth, but for the things that we are trying to build within integration, yes, it was better with segregation because we already had those things.
Yeah, I've heard people say, ultimately that they would prefer to know that you didn't want me in your establishment if you had whites only, or if you had a whites only bathroom or a whites only bus, so that you would know where you're unwanted. And I know in theory that makes a lot of sense, because you obviously don't want to go somewhere that you're not welcome, and you certainly don't want to put your family in those situations if you're traveling and you got to make a pit stop. You don't want to put your family at risk by going into an establishment that doesn't want you. At least you'll know off the top when you see those signs. But it says, Baker said, the problem with segregation is you have to have a firm foundation. And we did, but it was sporadic. Like it wasn't like one giant area where you're talking about millions of people, to where you can develop everything that you need to be self-sufficient. So to be self-sufficient, meaning that you have to be able to, if you're going to call it a Black hospital, then you need to be able to fund it. And it needs to have all the modern equipment and technology that the white hospitals have. So you have to have all those things. So in most cases, you need some other funding than just one person's wallet or a group of people, right? Because what'll happen when those people die or decide that they want to pull their money, whatever reason. But so you have to have a foundation, which is the foundation of the federal government that you usually have in these situations. And then it trickles down to your state government and then your localities, right? You would have to build that structure. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but the question is, how long you think that'll take? How long you would take to get that structure to where you're self-sufficient? And I don't know, this is just my personal opinion about Black people. And I've said this on this podcast many a times, and anybody that know me, I say it all the time. I love Black people. Sometimes I just don't fucking understand us. It is hard to get Black people to unite, and it is hard for Black people to understand their personal responsibility to something. I'll give you a great example. Two, projects, parks, right? So when you go to the park and you play basketball, your responsibility should be, when I'm done with my water bottle or my Gatorade bottle, is to dispose of it properly. In parks, in Black neighborhoods, that doesn't typically happen. So we don't take care of our own. You look into projects. When you go to a project, what do you see? Shit is just in disarray because we don't take care of it. So white people aren't coming in there and trashing it and then leaving. That's us. So we don't take care of it. So, and I'm not saying this is every Black person. I just understand civics, right? I'm not saying every Black person is doing this. I'm saying as a group, this is what happens. And when you talk about investing in something, you want to make sure the people, because if I invest in a project, I'm not investing in the building. I'm investing in the people. But the people have to accept that investment and then do the right thing. 9 times out of 10, that doesn't happen in Black community. So how long would it take for us to build those kind of communities? We talk about Tulsa, Oklahoma all the time with the Greenwood District, right? That was one location. We could talk about down in Florida. That was one location. How long does it take to build that structure so that you can have a Black federal government? Because you can't say I want to be segregated, but I need your money. You can't do that. So how do we do that? So those are the kind of things that says that what segregation did versus what desegregation did, I think it allowed us to have more access to what white Americans had access to legally, which is funding for things that could either save your life or allow you to pursue a better life. Funding. You need the funding.
Yeah, and then a lot of that stuff is also convenience too, because let's say, for instance, back in the day you lived in Bedford. If you had to go to the hospital, you had to go all the way to Roanoke, to Central Hospital. So yes, that's Black institution, but if you got to have a 45-minute drive,
Cost you your life.
yeah, it may cost you because you don't have that opportunity here in this place. So when you talk about locations wise, we act like Tulsa Greenwood District was this huge city.
That's right.
But it wasn't.
No.
It was a few blocks.
Few blocks.
You know what I'm saying? So when you look at it from that aspect, it's very different, you know?
And you got to think about security. I mean, we just point out a few things. I mean, this is not something that we're planning something, right? So just need people to understand. There's a lot of things you got to take in consideration, and we can't think about all of them or even talk about all of them. But you do have to take in consideration security.
Military.
So if you had your, let's just say they're going to give Black people the Oklahoma. All Black people can move to Oklahoma. Who's going to protect us from China?
Right.
In fact, the way Donald Trump talks sometimes,
China,
if we're not
protect them
paying
from
our
America.
fair share, he might just let them come in there and do whatever they want to.
Protect from China, protect from America. That's what happened with Tulsa. Once you build this place up, hey, we come in to get that.
Yeah, somebody's got to be able. So we got to have some protection.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying that you couldn't build an army, but an army of 20 million versus an army versus 300 million, you probably ain't gonna win that. Yeah. You know, So these are the kind of things that were going in consideration if you did have that. But also, the funny thing to me is that some of the black people that I heard talk about, desegregation hurt black people, and then I look at the clothes that they have on, I'd be like, yeah, brother, if you only knew, if you only knew, you would not be wearing what you, because you wouldn't have access to it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, you would. I'm sure we would have definitely created some fly shit.
Yeah.
Right? But you wouldn't have been wearing that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So before you start talking about desegregation, how about go buy your clothes from Walmart, and then we have another discussion.
Right.
Right? But as long as you come in and dress like that, I don't hear nothing about no desegregation, man.
Yeah.
You driving a Mercedes Benz. What fucking stock black people own in that? So
Yeah. But even with, with that, we're still segregated in a lot of forms. There's still predominantly black neighborhoods, predominantly Hispanic neighborhoods. There's still predominantly Asian neighborhoods. Like, we're still segregated in some form or fashion.
And that's either by choice or by finance.
Yeah.
What you can afford. And let's be real, most of us, even though we always talk about coming from poverty and living in, the ghetto neighborhoods or whatever. And even when we move out, where do we feel the most comfortable? Back in those same neighborhoods. So at the end of the day, you live where you're comfortable. You want better conditions for your kids, which is why you see sometimes you'll see elderly people who live in the ghetto stay there because their kids are already gone.
Yeah.
Right? I'm good. I'm comfortable here. Everybody knows me, and then that's usually a safe haven for people. Living in poverty is not the worst thing that can happen. Mm-hmm. You can live in a white neighborhood and things could be a lot worse for you.
Yeah. I have one last thing before we leave. We know that the term motherfucker kind of came from Maryland, with them actually making the children breed with their mother during slavery, and that term motherfucker actually comes around. But the first time that it's actually used in a noun came from a black soldier who sent a defiant letter to his draft board in which he called them low down motherfuckers. He was court-martialed and did 10 years of hard labor. So just another day of black history, the first time that we have evidence of the noun, of motherfucker being used as a noun, came from a black soldier.
Now I understand why Mom says she never liked that word.
A low down, you low down motherfuckers.
Yeah, that's like to send that in an email to a few people. Yeah.
Appreciate y'all. We love y'all. Peace.